The night was quiet, the kind of silence that settles over the city after most people have already gone home. A few streetlights flickered above an almost empty road, casting long shadows across the pavement. The air was cool, and the distant sound of traffic echoed faintly between the buildings. Walking calmly down the sidewalk was a man in a dark jacket. His pace was steady, unhurried, like someone who had walked this path 1,000 times before. He kept his hands in his pockets, his expression relaxed, almost unreadable. To anyone passing by, he looked like an ordinary man simply heading home after a long day. But he wasn't alone on that street. Across the road, near a dimly lit corner store, 3 men leaned against a wall. They watched quietly as the stranger approached. At first, their attention seemed casual, but soon their eyes followed every step he took. One of them nudged the other and nodded toward the man walking alone. "Easy target," he muttered under his breath. The others smirked. The street was quiet, the sidewalks empty, and the timing felt perfect. To them, the situation looked simple: 1 man alone, 3 of them waiting in the shadows. They pushed themselves off the wall and slowly stepped into the sidewalk, spreading out just enough to block the stranger's path. Their movements were slow and deliberate, like predators closing in on something they believed couldn't fight back. The man stopped walking when he saw them. For a moment, none of them spoke. The streetlight above flickered again, casting brief flashes of light across their faces. One of the men stepped forward with a crooked smile. "Hey," he said casually, "why don't you hand over your wallet and phone?" The stranger looked at them quietly. No panic, no rush. Just calm eyes studying each of them one by one. And that calm was the first sign they had made a terrible mistake. The 3 men surrounded him slowly, each taking a position that cut off any easy escape. One stood in front, hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, his grin sharp and mocking. The second lingered to the side, watching for any sign of fear. The third stayed behind, silent but ready to move if things escalated. To them it was simple, an easy score, a quiet street, a stranger who looked like he wouldn't fight back. The man in the dark jacket didn't move. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't try to argue or reason with them. He simply looked at the one standing in front, meeting his eyes with an expression that revealed nothing. No anger, no desperation, just calm observation. That unsettled the thug more than he expected. People usually reacted, begged, pleaded, or at least showed some sign of panic. This stranger did none of that. It was like he was measuring the situation, understanding it, calculating something in his mind. "Did you hear me?" the thug said, stepping closer. His voice was louder now, meant to intimidate. "Phone now." The man in the jacket finally spoke, his tone quiet but firm. "You should walk away." The words were simple. No threats, no aggression, just a warning. The thug laughed. It was short and harsh, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He glanced back at his friends, expecting them to join in. They smirked, clearly thinking the same thing. This guy was bluffing. "Walk away," the thug repeated. "You really think you get to tell us what to do?" He stepped forward and shoved the stranger's shoulder, not hard enough to knock him down, but enough to assert dominance. Enough to prove he wasn't afraid. For a second, nothing happened. The stranger didn't stumble. He didn't react with anger. He simply tilted his head slightly, studying the hand that had touched him. The thug grinned, thinking he had made his point. "That's what I thought." But then something shifted. It wasn't obvious at first. No dramatic movement. No sudden outburst. Just a subtle change in the air, like the calm before a storm. The stranger's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and his posture shifted not aggressively but deliberately, like someone who had decided the situation required action. The thug noticed it. So did his friends. And in that brief moment of realization, a small but undeniable thought crossed their minds. Maybe this wasn't going to be as easy as they had imagined. The thug in front stepped back slightly, more out of instinct than fear. He glanced at his 2 companions, expecting reassurance, but both of them were staring as well, their confident smirks beginning to falter. The quiet man in the dark jacket hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even flinched when shoved. Yet somehow, that calm exuded a presence far heavier than any words or threats. "Are you seriously not scared?" The first thug finally asked, his voice betraying a hint of doubt. The stranger's response was almost casual. "You should leave, now." There was no anger in his tone, no raised volume. Just a quiet certainty that carried weight. For the first time that night, the street felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged. The other 2 thugs shifted uneasily, one of them glancing toward the street behind them, calculating escape routes. They had chosen what they thought would be an easy target, but now hesitation crept in. The first thug scoffed, forcing a laugh, trying to mask the tension coiling in his chest. "You think a few words are going to scare us off?" The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied each of them in turn, his gaze precise and unyielding, measuring their movements, their posture, the tension in their muscles. Years of discipline were evident in the way he observed, silent yet commanding. The second thug stepped closer, reaching out, pretending to poke fun. "You're really calm, but I bet you won't be for long." "Try me," the stranger said softly. The words were almost too quiet, yet somehow they filled the space between them, impossible to ignore. It was the kind of calm that demanded attention, the kind that made even the most confident feel exposed. The first thug laughed again, but it was shorter this time. "All right, that's it," he muttered, tightening his fists. He moved as if to shove the man again, to reassert control. Before his hand even made contact, the stranger's body shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible but precise. The air seemed to snap around them, the movement too fast, too controlled to be ordinary. The thug felt a sudden pressure, a shift in balance, and stumbled slightly backward, caught off guard. The other two thugs froze, their bravado cracking. For a brief moment, the street was silent except for the distant hum of traffic. The stranger's eyes met theirs again, unflinching, and the faintest smirk appeared, not cruel, not mocking, but knowing. "You don't understand," one of the thugs whispered to the other, voice low. "This isn't just some guy on the street." The first thug's grin had vanished entirely. He looked at his friends, then back at the man before him, suddenly aware that the entire situation had shifted. The power dynamic they had assumed was theirs had disappeared. Instead of fear radiating from the quiet man, it now radiated from him, controlled, precise, and undeniable. A chilling thought ran through all three of them at once. They had picked the wrong man, and in that instant, the quiet stranger wasn't just a target anymore. He was the one in control. The street, the night, the shadows around them, all seemed to bend subtly toward him, drawing the three would be predators into the weight of a truth they weren't prepared to face. The stranger tilted his head slightly, and his voice cut through the tension with calm finality. "You should walk away. One more mistake, and it won't just be your pride that's bruised." The words were simple, but in their quiet certainty, they carried a warning that needed no demonstration. Yet, for the first time, the three thugs understood that this encounter would not end the way they had imagined. The silence stretched for a moment, tense and electric. The three thugs exchanged glances, their bravado fading as they realized they were facing someone far beyond their expectations. One of them, still trying to cling to some shred of control, stepped forward aggressively, aiming to intimidate again. "I said walk away." The man in the dark jacket repeated, his voice calm, unwavering. His eyes held a focus that was unnerving. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. The warning was already enough to make them hesitate. But hesitation only enraged the first thug. He lunged, trying to grab the man by the jacket, expecting resistance. Instead, his hand met only empty space for a split second. The movement was so fast, so precise, that the thug felt as though he had been outmaneuvered before he even moved. His balance shifted, and he stumbled slightly, caught off guard. The quiet stranger didn't strike, didn't raise his fists. He simply adjusted his stance, subtle and controlled, positioning himself so that any further aggression would be ill-advised. It was almost imperceptible, a shift in weight, a glance, a tightening of his jaw, yet it was enough. The second thug, seeing his friend falter, moved to help, but the first thug's stumble had already broken the rhythm of their confidence. They were no longer a team. Doubt had entered the equation. The street no longer belonged to them. "You think this is a game?" The first thug spat, his voice shaking slightly. "You think we'll just let you?" His words faltered mid-sentence as he realized he couldn't finish the thought. The stranger's calmness was oppressive, deliberate. Every muscle, every movement was measured. Every slight shift in posture communicated control without needing words. And then, in a blink, the first thug found himself on the ground, not violently thrown, not slammed, but unbalanced and pinned by the subtle force of precise action. The motion was so smooth, so controlled, that it seemed effortless yet devastating. The other two thugs froze. Their eyes widened as they took in what had just happened. The man they had thought was weak had already turned the tables. Every step, every movement had been calculated. The energy in the air shifted entirely. Fear, not bravado, filled the space between them. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," the stranger said quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for all three to hear. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. One thug, trembling now, whispered to the other, I think we made a huge mistake." The third thug, who had stayed silent until now, took a hesitant step back, realizing that the street they thought was theirs was now under someone else's control. The first thug scrambled to his feet, but it was too late. The weight of authority, calm and undeniable, hung over them. The stranger's gaze swept over each of them, slow and deliberate. He didn't strike again, but the implication was clear: any further aggression would be met with precision, not mercy. For the first time that night, the three thugs understood the truth. They had picked the wrong man, and in the quiet, controlled power of the one standing before them, they saw exactly how badly they had underestimated him. The street, once ordinary, had become a stage for a lesson they would not forget. And the man in the dark jacket, calm and unshaken, was about to deliver it. The first thug struggled to his feet, breathing hard, trying to regain some sense of control. His confidence had cracked, but pride refused to let him back down. He glanced at his companions, expecting reassurance, but they looked just as shaken. The second thug kept glancing toward the street, calculating escape routes. The third avoided eye contact entirely. The quiet stranger in the dark jacket hadn't chased them. He hadn't mocked them. He simply stood there, calm and composed, as if the entire encounter were nothing more than an inconvenience. That silence was more unsettling than any threat. It suggested control absolute and unshakable. "You think you're tough." The first thug snapped, his voice louder now, trying to mask his doubt. "You got lucky." The stranger's expression didn't change. He looked at the thug the way someone might look at a child throwing a tantrum, not with anger, but with understanding. "Luck had nothing to do with it," he replied. The words hung in the air, simple. Final. The second thug shifted uneasily. "Let's just go," he muttered, low enough that the others could barely hear. "This isn't worth it." The first thug shot him a glare. "Shut up, we're not leaving." But his tone betrayed him. The bravado was gone. What remained was desperation, the kind that made people double down even when they knew they were losing. He took a step forward, fists clenched, as if preparing to fight again. The stranger didn't move to meet him. He didn't raise his hands. He simply spoke. "I warned you." It was quiet, but it carried weight. The kind of weight that made people hesitate. The thug hesitated. Just for a second. That was enough. In that brief moment, something clicked in his mind. He studied the stranger more closely, the controlled posture, the precise way he moved, the quiet confidence that radiated from him without effort. It wasn't arrogance. It was familiarity. Like someone who had seen situations like this 1,000 times before. The realization hit him like ice water. This wasn't some random guy. His eyes widened slightly. He took a half step back. "No," he whispered. The second thug noticed the change.
"What?"
The first thug swallowed hard. He looked at the stranger again, really looked. And then the pieces fell into place. The way he moved, the discipline in his stance, the unmistakable aura of someone who understood combat, control, and consequence. He had seen footage like this before. Stories, news clips, training demonstrations, quiet efficiency, no wasted movement, no unnecessary force. And one name surfaced in his mind, a name that made his stomach drop. "Wait," he said, his voice barely audible. The other two thugs froze. They followed his gaze, trying to understand. The street was still quiet. The only sound was distant traffic and the faint rustle of wind. The first thug's hands trembled. "I know who you are," he whispered. The stranger tilted his head slightly, but his expression remained unreadable. He didn't confirm anything. He didn't need to. The realization had already taken hold. The thug's throat tightened. His mouth went dry. He wanted to deny it, to convince himself he was wrong. But the evidence was undeniable, the controlled movements. The way the situation had shifted so quickly. The unmistakable presence of someone trained, experienced, and utterly unfazed. It was him, Steven Seagal. The name echoed in his mind. Not spoken aloud, but understood. A truth he couldn't ignore. The second thug saw the change in his friend's expression. "What are you talking about?" The first thug shook his head, backing up another step. This isn't worth it." The third thug finally spoke, voice trembling. "Are you serious? It's just one guy." The first thug looked at him, eyes wide. "Not just any guy." The words sent a chill through the other two. They studied the stranger again, this time with different eyes. The calmness that had once seemed strange now made sense. The control, the precision, the quiet authority. They had made a terrible mistake. The second thug swallowed hard. "We should go." No one argued. Pride had already been shattered. What remained was survival instinct. The understanding that some situations couldn't be won. Not like this. Not against someone they had underestimated so badly. The first thug took another step back, then another. His hands were still clenched, but not in defiance. In fear. The kind of fear that came from recognizing consequences. "We're done," he muttered. The stranger didn't stop them. He didn't taunt them. He simply watched as they retreated, their confidence gone. Their earlier aggression reduced to nothing. Because realization had already done the work. They had picked the wrong man. And now they understood exactly what that meant. The three thugs backed away slowly, their earlier bravado replaced with uncertainty. They didn't speak. No insults, no threats, just the quiet, uneasy shuffle of feet against concrete as they created distance. The realization had taken hold, and with it came the understanding that continuing would only make things worse. The street, once filled with their false confidence, now felt thawed, like a place they no longer controlled. The man in the dark jacket watched them go, his expression unchanged. He didn't celebrate their retreat. He didn't mock their fear. There was no need for theatrics. The lesson had already been delivered. One of the thugs glanced back, just once. His eyes met the stranger's, and he immediately looked away. The weight of that brief exchange lingered, a silent acknowledgement of consequences. They had chosen aggression. They had chosen intimidation, and now they understood the cost. "Come on," the second thug muttered, pulling at his friend's sleeve. "It's over." The first thug hesitated, fist still clenched, but his shoulders sagged. Pride fought with survival instinct, yet survival won. He turned away, swallowing hard. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's over." They walked off, disappearing down the street, their footsteps fading into the night. No dramatic exit, no final confrontation. Just the quiet departure of people who had learned a hard truth. Not every target is weak, and not every mistake can be undone. The stranger remained where he was, watching until they were gone. Then he exhaled softly and adjusted his jacket, as if the entire encounter had been nothing more than a brief interruption. His composure was striking. No adrenaline, no lingering tension, just calm. But the night wasn't finished. Distant sirens broke the silence, growing louder with each passing second. The blue and red lights of a police vehicle soon reflected off nearby buildings, painting the street in shifting colors. The car pulled to the curb and two officers stepped out. They surveyed the scene quickly, the empty street, the subtle signs of a confrontation, the man standing alone. One officer approached, his expression cautious but professional. "Is everything all right here?" he asked. The stranger nodded. "It is now." The officer studied him for a moment, then glanced around. There were no visible injuries, no property damage, no immediate signs of escalation. Just the lingering tension of what had almost happened. "We got a call about a disturbance," the officer continued. "Reports of a confrontation." The stranger met his gaze. It ended before it became one. The officer raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. He had seen enough situations like this to understand that not every story needed a detailed explanation. Sometimes the absence of chaos was evidence enough. He looked down the street where the thugs had disappeared. "Do you need to file a report?" The stranger considered the question, then shook his head. "No," he said. The officer hesitated, then nodded. "All right. If anything changes, let us know." It wasn't skepticism, it was procedure. A way of ensuring everything was truly under control. Satisfied for the moment, the officers returned to their vehicle and drove off, the sirens fading into the distance. The street fell quiet once more. The man in the dark jacket remained for a few seconds, listening to the night. Then he turned and continued walking, his pace steady and unhurried, the same way he had walked before the confrontation. Nothing about his movement suggested victory or pride. It was simply forward motion. Justice, in its smallest form, had arrived. Not through spectacle, not through revenge, but through consequence and understanding. The thugs had chosen aggression and faced the natural result of that choice. The stranger had chosen restraint and control, ensuring the situation ended without unnecessary harm. It was a quiet resolution, one that wouldn't make headlines or viral clips. But for those who had witnessed it, and for the thugs who now carried the memory of their mistake, the lesson was undeniable. Actions have consequences. Power is not measured by intimidation, and sometimes, the most decisive victories require no shouting, no celebration, and no further proof. The truth had been revealed. The balance had shifted. And life, as it always does, moved forward. The night slowly returned to normal. The police vehicle disappeared down the street, its red and blue lights fading into darkness. The distant hum of traffic resumed, and the quiet neighborhood settled back into its usual rhythm. On the surface, nothing about the street looked different. No crowds, no chaos, no signs of a dramatic event. But for those who understood what had happened, something had changed. The three thugs were gone. They had retreated into the night, their confidence shattered. There would be no triumphant stories told among friends, no exaggerated retellings of victory, only silence. The kind of silence that followed lessons learned the hard way. Each of them would carry the memory, the realization that they had underestimated someone, that aggression had consequences, and that not every situation could be controlled through force. The man in the dark jacket continued walking. His steps were steady, unhurried, as if nothing significant had occurred. There was no need to dwell on the confrontation, No desire to turn it into something larger than it was. He had acted when necessary, resolved the situation, and now moved forward. That was all. People sometimes imagine that moments like these required grand speeches or displays of dominance. But real strength rarely worked that way. It didn't announce itself. It didn't demand applause. It simply existed quiet, disciplined, and deliberate. The stranger's actions had spoken louder than any words, yet he sought no recognition for them. Life on the street resumed. A couple walking their dog passed by, chatting softly. A nearby apartment window glowed with warm light as someone moved inside. The ordinary details of the night returned, reminding everyone that the world continued. Conflicts arose, were resolved, and then faded into memory. The waitress at the corner store had seen none of the confrontation. She continued stacking shelves, unaware of how close the situation had come to escalating. She would go home at the end of her shift, tired but safe, a simple outcome that mattered more than spectacle. Sometimes justice was not about dramatic resolutions. It was about ensuring that harm was prevented and dignity preserved. As for the thugs, they would eventually reflect on what happened. Maybe not immediately. Pride often delayed understanding. But in quieter moments, lying awake at night or replaying the events in their minds, the truth would surface. They had chosen the wrong target. They had believed intimidation would work. They had mistaken calm for weakness. That realization would stay with them. Not as a source of endless guilt, but as a lesson. People grow when they confront their mistakes. The best among them learn, adapt, and choose differently in the future. Perhaps one of the thugs would decide to change his path. To walk away from situations that led to harm. To understand that strength is not measured by how loudly you assert yourself, but by how responsibly you act. The stranger's identity remained unspoken during the incident, but anyone familiar with his presence would have recognized him. The composed discipline, the controlled movements, the quiet authority. It was the unmistakable signature of someone who understood both conflict and restraint. A name that carried recognition, Stephen Seagal. Yet he had not invoked that recognition during the encounter. He had acted as an individual, not a symbol. This distinction mattered. Stories often reduced people to characters, heroes, villains, saviors. Reality was more nuanced. The stranger was neither a myth nor a caricature. He was a human being making choices just like everyone else. Choices that reflected discipline and responsibility, but choices nonetheless. The aftermath of the event was quiet. No headlines. No viral debates. The world moved on as it always does. The police would file a brief report and close the case. The store owner would review security footage and ensure procedures were followed. The waitress would continue her work, perhaps a little more aware of the importance of boundaries and respect. And the street would remain the same, a place where ordinary people lived their lives, occasionally intersecting with moments of tension or conflict, but ultimately shaped by the choices they made. The lesson of that night was simple. Violence and intimidation rarely lead to lasting solutions. They create fear and resentment, not understanding. Real strength lies in control, in knowing when to act and when to walk away. It lies in protecting others without seeking praise. In resolving problems without unnecessary harm. The thugs had learned that lesson the hard way. The stranger had demonstrated it through action, and the community, whether fully aware or not, benefited from the outcome. A situation that could have escalated ended with minimal disruption. No one was seriously hurt. No irreversible damage was done. That is the essence of justice in its quietest form, not revenge, not spectacle, but the restoration of balance. The acknowledgement that actions have consequences, and that those consequences shape future behavior. The night continued. The stranger disappeared down the street, blending into the shadows before eventually stepping into the warmth of everyday life. The events of the evening would fade from memory, replaced by new experiences and stories. But for those who had witnessed or understood what happened, a small truth remained: strength and wisdom are not measured by domination, but by responsibility. And sometimes, the most meaningful resolutions are the ones that require no further explanation.